Necessary to Destroy Media Narratives. I'm George Samueli, and it is now time for, yes, the Tuesday night live stream from Budapest. And welcome everybody who has joined me. I see some of our old friends here. Very happy to see you. And there's a few things I want to get to today. I'm obviously going to talk about developments in Hungary, but I want to start with um, Trump and Iran. Now, obviously, this is an ongoing saga, and we've been trying to figure out what exactly Trump, well, first of all, what Trump is going to do in the coming days, and whatever he does, how does he accomplish any of his goals through his actions? And so it's clear that the Strait of Hormuz, basically, he's failed to achieve anything on that. And he has failed to move Iran from its position that anything that goes in and out of the Persian Gulf must be accomplished through and negotiation with Tehran. So that it's basically insisted on that. The United States has tried all sorts of ways to get around it, using the Omani channel, not consulting Tehran, using ships without having their transponders on. Iran said we're not going to do that, and now once again the Strait of Hormuz is closed. So Trump obviously wants to get out of that mess, and then he's got another mess on his hands, and that is with the Houthis closing the Bab al-Mandab Strait to Saudi ships. So they said basically when no one's going to go through that, and so now you've got two vital waterways that are effectively closed. So that's obviously going to have serious economic repercussions. Now, Trump could, of course, go back to the memorandum of understanding, the 14-point memorandum of understanding, but Iran will obviously hold the U.S. feet to the fire, and they're not just going to say, okay, fine, well, let's go back to that, because now Iran will insist on removing all of the ambiguity that attended not Article 5, Paragraph 5, but you can also call it Article 5, but Paragraph 5 about the whether Iran must be consulted on the transport of any ships through the Persian Gulf. So that is Iran will now want any renewed memorandum of understanding, and Trump has already said the MOU is a dead letter, and Iran has also said the MOU is a dead letter. So if you're going to try and revive it and have a kind of MOU 2.0, then Iran will obviously insist that all ambiguities be removed and that it's made clear that no ships go through the Strait of Hormuz, either to or from anywhere in the Persian Gulf, without Iran's say-so. So that obviously will be any key part of any MOU 2.0. So, but Trump has now been suggesting that some kind of military action is imminent, some major military action is imminent, even though there are no major U.S. forces in the region that would suffice for any major military action, for any kind of ground operation. You really need a huge number of U.S. forces. So we often talk about the build-up to the invasion of Iraq in 2003. That took about 18 months to prepare. So it was a major undertaking. Um, and even then, it was questionable whether the U.S. had sufficient resources in place to achieve what they wanted to achieve. But they didn't have enough forces to invade Iraq and enough forces to topple Saddam Hussein and occupy Baghdad. I mean, they didn't have enough forces to pacify Iraq, but enough to accomplish their limited military goals. Now, at the moment, the U.S. doesn't have anything like enough forces in the region to undertake any kind of serious ground action. We outlined the various scenarios for a ground invasion. It would have to be a limited ground invasion. It wouldn't be a kind of let's all march on to Tehran. I mean, that's just a huge, huge undertaking. The United States would have to reintroduce conscription in order to move towards a full-scale invasion and a seizure of Tehran. So that's not on the cards. So what are we talking about? So, well, we could talk about the seizure of Karg Island. That certainly can be done, but to hold Karg Island would be very difficult because, of course, Iran still has a very substantial military, missile, and drone capability. And so any forces that would occupy Karg Island would come under immediate and quite ferocious Iranian attack. So it's not really a particularly viable option. And the same goes for the seizure and occupation of Iran's Persian Gulf coastline. It's a huge coast, and so you have to have an enormous number of American troops on hand to occupy that coastline. Again, they would come under attack from Iranian missiles and drones, so they would be, I think, sitting ducks. The other military option, of course, is to seize the three islands, which is the Abu Musa and Greater and Lesser Tumb. Could be doable, but I don't know how much strategic significance that would have occupying those islands. It's possible the United States would do it. Again, I think they would come under attack from Iran. I don't see what exactly the U.S. would accomplish by doing so. So there aren't any great ground options. So we're back to massive bombing, and then of course there's the 800-pound gorilla in the room, that if the massive bombing fails, does the United States resort to the use of tactical nuclear weapons? Now, I do think that the use of tactical nuclear weapons is being discussed right now in the White House. I'm sure that is an option that is on the table, and it's clearly being weighed as to, hey, why not do it? I mean, nobody has used nuclear weapons, as far as we know. Nobody has used nuclear weapons since 1945. So why not use them? I mean, it's only tactical, so it'll be limited. And then it will send a powerful signal. Now, I tend to think that if the nuclear option is exercised, if the United States decides that we've come to the point when there's no other option, nothing better than to use nuclear weapons, then I think that the use would be delegated to Israel. I mean, and by doing so, of course, it would enhance the U.S.-Israeli relationship, because then U.S. and Israel would forever be bonded in this crime of using nuclear weapons. And Israel will then have done a major favor for the United States. Hey, we did this for you. I still have my doubts that the United States itself would resort to nuclear weapons against Iran. Remember, nuclear weapons have been used only once in history, and the one time that they were used, it was against a non-nuclear power. So that's already very, very difficult. The idea of, I mean, once again, um, uh, the United States, obviously, whether Russia or the United States, whichever of the two is the greatest nuclear power in the world, they're obviously pretty symmetrical. But if you have the greatest nuclear power in the world and then using nuclear weapons against a non-nuclear power, that obviously is a very bad optics. And obviously, it also serves to encourage others to use nuclear weapons to resolve any problems that they have. Hey, we're not able to deal with this uh, problem that we're in by any conventional methods. Why not just use nukes? I mean, we have them. The other side doesn't. Well, why not do so? So, if the United States were to do that, then obviously the argument against Russia using nuclear weapons would disappear. I mean, well, Russia would say, well, hey, if you get to use them, then why can't we use them? I mean, it would just resolve all our problems. And not only did you use the nuclear weapons, you used the nuclear weapons against a non-nuclear power. In other words, you knew that your adversary would not hit you back, would have no capability of hitting you back. So if the United States does it, then obviously all restraints are taken off other powers. Now, that wouldn't necessarily preclude the United States from using it. They say, well, I don't. Well, okay, we can use it, but we will be hypocritical as we always are, and we will tell Russia, don't you ever dare to use nuclear weapons ever yourself. We get to do it, but you don't. So that's a familiar routine, and we've seen it in other circumstances in which the United States insists that, for instance, the right to protect or the right to embark on humanitarian intervention, to bombing for peace, that's a right uniquely possessed by the United States and its NATO allies. Russia can't use that same right, exercise that same right. China can't exercise that same right. Only the United States and NATO do. Only they get to use bombs for humanitarian ends. So, in the same way they say, yeah, we had to use nuclear weapons. That doesn't mean that Russia gets to use nuclear weapons in Ukraine. Special circumstances that applied because we were using them against Iran, and Iran is uniquely evil, and therefore we get to use them, and you don't. So that's certainly a the fact that Russia would also say, we get to use nuclear weapons, that will not stop the United States. The United States will, on the contrary, insist, as it always does, on its hypocritical right to do whatever it wants to do, and not grant anyone else a similar right. Now, I think that is very much a distinct possibility, because a nuclear weapon would also send a signal to Iran: hey, just knock it off. Don't now is the time to sue for peace, because we used it once. We used nuclear weapons once, and we can use it again, and nothing can stop us. That's, I think, very important. Nothing can stop us, because with with all the scenarios that we talked about in the past about nuclear war, the scenarios involved um, two nuclear powers going at it, um, and therefore, so you have to think about deterrence. Well, deterrence means, if we fire off a nuclear missile against a nuclear armed adversary, they obviously will hit us back, and therefore, effectively, we would be signing off on millions of our own citizens getting killed, and that always served as a deterrent to the use of nuclear weapons. However, that deterrent does not apply when you're up against a non-nuclear power, and as far as we know, Iran is a non-nuclear power, and so therefore the United States could use nuclear weapons, and or United States could delegate this to Israel. Israel could use nuclear weapons against Iran, and Iran would not really have much in the way of a comeback. Now, obviously Iran could hit back Israel. I mean, could hit Israel very hard. But it's still not the same as being hit by a nuclear weapon. So I'm not saying that this is going to happen. I think that it's one of those things that is being discussed. And from Iran's perspective, no one is going to come in on Iran's behalf and say, well, Iran's been attacked by nuclear weapons, so therefore we will use nuclear weapons from our arsenal against the United States. Pakistan is not going to do that. Pakistan is not going to go wage nuclear war against the United States. Russia's not going to do that. China's not going to do that. So essentially, Iran would then be on its own. So that's why I do tend to think that this is being discussed as a way to resolve this problem that Trump has created for himself, which is that he is unable to accomplish any of his goals. And his threats to unleash holy hell against Iran's civilian population, and why people say, oh, yeah, that's a war crime, that's a war crime. Yeah, it's a war crime to threaten to annihilate the civilian population. It's obviously a more serious war crime actually to carry such a threat out. But that isn't going to compel Iran to surrender. I'm not even sure nuclear weapons would compel Iran to surrender. It's as we've discussed before in the case of Japan, it wasn't Hiroshima and Nagasaki that compelled the Iranian surrender. It was the defeat of the Kwantung Army at the hands of the Red Army that told the Japanese leadership that the jig is up. But so one thing that has emerged in recent days is the possibility of a new target for U.S. attack. Now, whether they will use nuclear weapons in this attack, I'm not sure, but that certainly is a distinct possibility. And Trump seemed to hint that nuclear weapons in hitting this new target have not been taken off the table. I'm of course talking about Pickaxe Mountain, which has now become the focus of the Trump administration. And there was an article today in the Wall Street Journal, of course, suggesting that Iran has moved its centrifuges to Pickaxe Mountain deep underground, and that Pickaxe Mountain will be a much harder target to hit than the three nuclear facilities that the United States hit in June 2025. And again, suggesting that, well, maybe you should start thinking about using nuclear weapons to hit Pickaxe Mountain. Anyway, take a look at story in the Wall Street Journal. And here it is. Israel, of course, always Israel. Israel believes Iran moved nuclear centrifuges into Pickaxe Mountain. And the U.S. has reviewed the Israeli assessment, and President Trump has threatened to attack the site. Israeli intelligence believes Iran moved thousands of uranium enrichment centrifuges into tunnels deep inside mountain last fall. Israeli news officials say a development that would heighten concerns that Tehran could reconstitute its nuclear program. Israel passed along the intelligence findings to the US, of course it did, saying the centrifuges were transferred to the Pickaxe Mountain site last fall after the 12-day war in June, when American and Israeli strikes pummeled Iran's three main nuclear sites. And then, as Israel's war aims have increasingly diverged from the US's, Netanyahu has tried to persuade President Trump to resume all out attacks on Iran to further set back Tehran's weapons programs and rebuilding effort. The US has stepped up attacks in the past 10 days, and Trump said the US was prepared to attack Pickaxe Mountain. And then, and here it says Pickaxe is a possible target for a nice big fat shot. Trump told conservative broadcaster Hugh Hewitt it was the first time that he has explicitly talked about Pickaxe as a target, although he has previously mentioned an Iranian underground location buried in granite. And then, known as Mount Kolang in Iran, Pickaxe has been under surveillance by the US and Israel for years, and what little is known about Iran's activities at the site suggests it would present challenges to any airstrikes. Located near one of Iran's main nuclear installations, Pickaxe was commissioned as an underground replacement for an Iranian centrifuge assembly facility that was badly damaged after a 2020 explosion. And then here, Axios, of course, picks up the story. Trump vows U.S. will soon bomb Iran's Pickaxe Mountain. And then Trump said Tuesday that the U.S. military will bomb Iran's Pickaxe Mountains, a deep underground site that the U.S. and Israel suspect could be used for nuclear activity. And then Trump's remarks at the top of his meeting with the president of Lebanon at the White House signaled that he's not interested in the ceasefire at the moment and is moving towards escalating the strikes on Iran. We'll be hitting that area very probably pretty soon. There's not a thing they can do about it. You know, normally I wouldn't say that. If I thought they could do something about it, I would never say that. But we'll be hitting that area pretty soon and very heavily. Trump said the U.S. thinks Iran may have stored centrifuges at the site, but added, we don't have it on record. Even if Iran did, it doesn't mean anything unless they have nuclear material. He said Iran does not. Which is always very difficult. He says that Trump said the U.S. thinks Iran may have stored centrifuges at the site, but added, we don't have it on record. Even if Iran did, it doesn't mean anything unless they have nuclear material. He said Iran does not. And yet at the same time, they're always on the brink of developing nuclear weapons. It's not clear whether the U.S. military has bombs that can penetrate the rock above the deep underground facility. Nevertheless, a U.S. strike could do damage to the site and block its entrance tunnels. U.S. officials say Trump is nearing a fork in the Iran war with two options he's considering. Option one, pursue a new 10-day ceasefire aimed at reopening the Strait of Hormuz. That's the MOU 2.0. Qatar, Egypt, Pakistan, and other regional mediators are urging him to do so. Option two, launch a massive joint military campaign with Israel to try to force Iran to capitulate. Trump signaled on Tuesday he's leaning towards the second choice. He expressed no interest in restarting negotiations with Iran. They want to desperately meet, And until they're ready to meet in a meaningful way, we have no interest. He's always saying they're desperate to meet. No evidence at all that they want to meet. Um, and then, and again, the Financial Times also picks up the story. Trump vows to attack Iranian nuclear facility as Middle East war escalates. Trump has threatened a new escalation of his war in Iran, warning that the U.S. will launch attacks on heavy fortified Iranian nuclear site at a time when oil prices are rising rapidly. Trump told reporters on Tuesday that he thought Iran may have moved components critical to building a nuclear weapon to Pickaxe Mountain, and then so on. And then it says the facility, a few kilometers south of Natanz, is a harder target to hit than Fordo because it is deeper and better protected. It is also not as well mapped as Fordo was. Pickaxe has at least 4 tunnels compared to Fordo's 2, making it more difficult to bomb the entrances to close them off. Their depth could also put them out of reach of the US's 30,000-pound bunker buster bombs, which were used against Fordo last year. So that would suggest that I mean, I don't think they're planning on the bunker buster. I mean, after all, the bunker busters didn't do the job in 2025. The one that Trump proclaimed was so fantastically successful. Obviously, they were not successful. So going in with these bunker busters is already doomed to fail. That's why I do think that the nuclear option is very much on the table. In other words, this is um, uh, the way that you can actually, resolve all of your issues. Sign that you've got you've got the nuclear weapons. You're willing to use them, and then hope just one more roll of the dice and Iran will cave. As I say, I don't think it's likely. I just because why would they? They will, that you inflict that you're ready to use nuclear weapons. Okay, well, okay. So then, what are you going to do? I mean, if it comes out that the United States had used nuclear weapons or Israel had used nuclear weapons, there is going to be the almightiest international uproar. And I have to believe that after such an uproar, the United States would be reluctant to use the nuclear weapons again. So, which much the same happened, incidentally, with the use of nuclear weapons against Japan. I mean, U.S. did it once, but it was so shocking an act that the U.S. hasn't done it since, and nobody has done it since. So we'll have to see. As I say, I do think that the nuclear option is on the table. I think that Trump has tried the kinetic action, which went on from February 28th through to April the 8th, without any great success. He could try to escalate that and start hitting the things that he said he was contemplating, but actually backed away from, namely hitting Iran's energy infrastructure. I don't think he's going to want to do that for the obvious reason that Iran's made clear. You hit our energy infrastructure, we're going to hit the energy infrastructure throughout the region. If you want, we're going to knock out the power generators in Kuwait. We're going to knock out the desalination plants in Kuwait, in Qatar, and so on. You really don't want to go down this path. And I think Trump backed away from hitting Iran's energy infrastructure during the kinetic part of the war. I don't think he's going to do it, go there this time. So he's tried that. He's tried the negotiation path. which seemed at least promising. They got to all the way through to the signing of that 14-point memorandum of understanding, which was an accomplishment, but then just collapsed almost immediately, just over the interpretation of paragraph 5. I mean, and basically, I mean, the United States was trying to cheat on the agreement. I mean, the agreement was that Iran will facilitate the passage of ships to and from the Persian Gulf, which means that Iran has a say in all vessels crossing the Strait of Hormuz. And the United States immediately tried to get around that, tried to prevent Iran from having any say, tried to use the Omani channel exclusively, and obviously Iran wasn't going to accept that. So the negotiating path has been tried, and that's why Trump seems to be running out of options, and that's why I think the nuclear option is on the table. I'm not saying it's going to be used. I mean, it's a major step to do, but it may be, you know, something that Trump is contemplating as a way of breaking out of the impasse he's found himself in. These various options for using ground forces, I don't think they're very good. I don't think they can succeed unless you can come up with the scale of forces necessary to accomplish your goals. I mean, you need hundreds of thousands of U.S. forces to force Iran to to concede. Just occupying Carg Island or trying to seize the coastline, just you don't have the forces there to accomplish those goals, and they will just simply be sitting ducks for an Iranian counterattack. Anyway, that's thing. Now, they wanted to talk now about the situation in Hungary. So, if you recall, we discussed during yesterday's joint live stream that the constitutional coup accomplished by the new regime in Hungary, namely that they basically it's a one chamber parliament. They have a two-thirds majority, and so they passed a constitutional amendment firing the president, who had done nothing wrong. They couldn't find any grounds for impeaching him. Basically, he's fulfilled his responsibilities properly. He had done nothing to thwart the work of the Tissa government. He was eminently qualified for the position of president. He had been president of the Constitutional Court for a number of years. There was no reason to get rid of him other than because the Magyar regime wants to impose his will on every aspect of society. So they passed this constitutional amendment to eliminate him from that position, essentially fire him from that position. Tamás Súlyog, signed the amendment into law, and thereby he eliminated himself from the office. He was no longer president immediately upon the signing of this amendment. Now, the question then was, who was going to replace him? And Magyar began hinting that that he was going to appoint the Hungarian chess grandmaster Judit Polgár. She's kind of been the leading female chess player in the world for many years. And so he began suggesting, well, she's an eminent Hungarian, she's a chess player, she'd be able to unite the country. And it seemed when we recorded yesterday's live stream that it was a done deal. Judith Polgar would become president, though she was clearly unqualified to do so. She had never been a political figure. Obviously, knew nothing about Hungarian constitution, Hungarian law, or anything like that. But it seemed like a done deal. And then yesterday, late yesterday afternoon, Judith Polgar um, rejected the plan. Why exactly she said no is a little bit unclear. Clearly, the decision. I mean, Magyar had suggested that the appointment, his appointment of Polgar as president, would be very popular in the country. As it turned out, it wasn't particularly popular. People started raising all sorts of issues about her. Key issue, of course, is what are her qualifications to be president? How can you just simply pick someone randomly? I mean, a chess player, why not pick a football player, or or a pop singer, or any kind of prominent Hungarian, and say, right now, you're president. So I mean, it was obvious that it wasn't. I think people raise questions. You've bundled out of this job a man who was eminently qualified. You bundled him out of a job, even though he had done nothing wrong, and you haven't even been able to find a good reason to bundle him out of that job. And now you replace him with somebody who has no qualifications for that position. So that was obviously that criticism was heard on the social media. There were other, questions also, and there we don't yet know the answers because this is these matters are a little secretive. But there were suggestions that she, Judith Polgar, has an Israeli citizenship. Now, that's fine. People can have people can be dual citizens, and that's not unusual. It is unusual for a president to be a dual citizen. Now, it happened, of course, in Georgia. If you recall, that woman, Salome Zurabishvili. Do you remember the woman who was parachuted in? She was a French woman. Never stepped a foot in Georgia. She didn't have Georgian ancestry, but she was born in France. Had a reasonably successful career as a diplomat, as a French diplomat, but she had no real connections to Georgia. But the Western powers decided, well, how do we control Georgia? Well, let's stick in this woman, Zorabishvili. She doesn't speak a word of Georgian. She doesn't know the first thing about Georgia, never even been to Georgia. Let's stick her in as president. Why not? Hey, how do we control Georgia? Well, we'll control Georgia by having her as president. And the Georgians accepted it. And, they rushed through a citizenship for her. She became a Georgian citizen. And without speaking a word of Georgian, she became president. And then, if you remember, there was an election last year, and she refused to accept the election results. She'd been told by her masters, you are not to accept this election result, the victory by the Georgia Dream Party. We don't control the Georgia Dream Party. So you are to say, no, it was all electoral fraud. No, it was all the Russians. The Russians interfered. This was not a genuine election. We must redo the election. But, Georgians didn't redo the election. And then the the assembly voted in a new president, and so Zora Betrili was her term in office expired. She, of course, didn't accept that outcome, and now she's I think she's got a job at the McCain Institute. I'm not quite sure where she's living. Probably she's back living in Paris. Dining well in Paris, but insisting that she is the legitimate president of Georgia. I think on her Twitter page, she lists herself as the incumbent president of Georgia. But anyway, the Hungarians really are not going to accept that. I don't think they're not going to accept a dual citizen as the president of their country. And I don't know for a fact that she is an Israeli citizen. I think her sister is, and I think her parents are. I think her parents and her sister live in Israel. I think she spends quite a lot of time in Israel, but I'm not sure whether it's not clear whether she herself also has an Israeli citizenship. Either way, all this caused a controversy, and I think she seemed to, at least last week, I think she'd given indications to Magyar that she intended to accept his offer to be president of Hungary, but given the uproar that greeted this news, she decided to back away, and so she sent out this message on Facebook. Let's take a look what she said. And she says, I consider it an honor of my life to be invited by the initiators to the position of President of the Republic, and I'm extremely grateful for it. I appreciate the Prime Minister's gesture, as despite the party's significant parliamentary weight, he has nominated an independent candidate for the President of the Republic above parties. And then she goes on, however, I do not feel strong enough to take on the historical responsibility of uniting a divided nation. This is, of course, quite interesting for her to say a divided nation, because keep in mind the way the media, the Western media, have been describing Hungary. It's very much along the lines that this new regime, this Tisza Magyar regime, is wildly popular. The Hungarians absolutely love Magyar and Tisza. They're rejoicing that Fidesz is gone and that Magyar is enjoying 90% approval ratings. That's the media spin. So she says something very different here. I do not feel strong enough to take on the historical responsibility of uniting a divided nation. So I cannot fully respond to the invitation. I will support a new, independent, and recognized President of the Republic in every possible way to achieve these goals. And then Judith Polgar. Now, though obviously there's a lot of problems there, because after all, Magyar had promised, and he's a great one for promising things, but he promised that there would be a national consultation. Whoever was appointed president, there would be a national consultation. But instead of a national consultation, he simply foisted this chess player onto the country and said, "Oh, this will be your new president." And she kind of sensed that there's going to be a lot of resentment. So that were she to be president, hey, there's every indication that she had agreed last week to be president of Hungary, but the controversy that Magyar's announcement had generated had led her to step back and say, well, I don't think I can do this. The other thing, of course, from her point of view, and is that there's no guarantee that what happened to her predecessor, Tamas Shuyok, wouldn't happen to her. I mean, if Shuyok can be removed from his position as president by, a constitutional amendment that you can just simply pass from one day to the next, then why wouldn't she be removed? I mean, she says or does something that Magyar doesn't like, Magyar just can remove her. After all, he didn't have any good reason to remove Shuyok, so he will remove her. So I think she probably felt that very quickly she's going to come into some kind of a conflict with Magyar, and her pristine reputation would crumble. But anyway, once she sent that out, saying no, I'm not going to accept this position. This after Magyar had already made clear that it was pretty much a done deal. She will be the next president. Well, Magyar had a lot of cleaning up to do. He had clearly made a fool of himself. He had first bungled out of the job somebody who was eminently qualified. He had bundled him out without any good reason, and obviously an illegal and unconstitutional coup. Um, but now he doesn't even have anyone to replace him. So he then had to scramble, and he sent out a tweet and a Facebook post. So first of all, the tweet: "Today I held a consultation with Judith Polgar, Hungary's living legend. Judith explained that given the circumstances that have arisen, she will not accept the nomination. I am sorry, but I respectfully accept her decision. Thank you to her for taking the request seriously. Thank you for her openness, her straightforward speech, and the dignity with which she handled the situation. I'm sorry if communication errors stemming from my joy and the enthusiasm born of unconditional trust may have contributed to the situation that has developed and to her decision." It's an unbridled joy. He had lost control of himself. He was just a little too gleeful, a little too enthusiastic, something he's wont to do. "The responsibility for those errors rests solely with me. Thank you, Judith Polgar, for considering the request. Thank you for what she has done for the Hungarian nation." So you can see he's kind of now looking rather foolish. So then he does this with on Facebook, but saying much the same thing, but a little bit more fulsome. Thank you for your openness, your straightforward speech, the dignity you handle the situation, and I am sorry if my enthusiasm and then so that does that. Now, of course, the media, they're kind of a little baffled. They don't quite know what to do with. You see, they've been told the script that they're told, and they're all reading from the same script. They all repeat what everyone else has already said, so that they'll repeat. Orban was this authoritarian strongman. He was more or less a dictator. He was, ruled with an iron hand, and everyone's happy he's gone. Quite how a dictator lost an election, that's never really explained. Whereas Magyar, well, he's young and cool, represents the younger generation, and of course, everything he does is in order to enhance democracy. So, passes the constitutional amendment, he just arbitrarily throws out a president. He arbitrarily decrees who should be next president. But that's so good because that's all in the name of enhancing democracy. It's all in the name of removing dictatorship. It's all in the name of removing the vestiges of Orbanism, because Orban, that's illiberal democracy. They will repeat this, illiberal democracy. They have no idea what illiberal democracy means. They have no idea what Orban meant by an illiberal democracy. It doesn't matter. They just repeat the same thing. But here they're a little bit baffled. They don't quite know what to think because they've been told that that Magyar is the cool guy. The dictator was Orban, and everything's fantastic. And this Judith Polgar was going to be the next president, and this will be fantastic. The hey, democracy is alive and kicking in Hungary, and we've got a chess grandmaster as the new president. This is fantastic. It's wonderful news. What a total humiliation for Orban, and now she's turned him down. So they're kind of scratching their heads, not quite knowing what are they supposed to interpret, what are they supposed to say, and they haven't yet figured this out. That's why reading these things, they're just going through the motions of repeating the same cliches, but they don't quite know what to make of this, essentially this humiliation for Magyar. So here is a typical example. Here's Euro News. Chess legend Judith Polgar rejects offer to become Hungary's president, and then and so on. Well, she issued her response after the TISA parliamentary group publicly backed her in parliament. However, critics noted that, contrary to earlier promises, her nomination was not preceded by a broad public consultation. You think? I mean, you think when you make a decision in 15 minutes, there couldn't have been a broad public consultation on this. I mean, I would think, if you just make that decision, there was no public consultation. So, but that was obviously just simply a sleight of hand. He just got a little bit carried away. It's just, he got a little excited, a little enthusiastic. That's all it was. No problem, no biggie. And so here he has no public consultation. And then says, after ejecting unpopular President Tamás Súlyog by constitutional amendment last week, Magyar backed Polgar late on Sunday as a president whom all Hungarians can be proud. Now, the whole idea that he's unpopular, this is all just simply made up by the media. He's neither popular nor unpopular because he's a ceremonial figure. Hungarians don't spend a great deal of their time thinking about Tamás Súlyog. If you were to ask Hungarians, well, who's the president? They wouldn't know. It's a ceremonial position. He has no real powers. So we would say, oh, he's wildly unpopular. Why would he be unpopular? What has he done that's unpopular? He's never done anything. His job is ceremonial. He signs laws. He swore into office the new government led by Péter Magyar. That was his job. So what's there to be unpopular about? Now, even if that were the case, let's say it was the case that he is extremely unpopular, and clearly you got Euro News that thinks it's entirely appropriate that you eject somebody from office who is wildly unpopular. Well, you have to think, well, okay, is there any political leader in Europe today who is not wildly unpopular? Macron's ratings are probably lower than the ratings of Tamás Súlyog, I would think. I think Friedrich Merz's ratings are probably lower than Tamás Súlyog. Does that mean they should be ejected? They should be bundled out of office because they're unpopular? No, of course not. Unpopularity is never any kind of justification for anyone's removal from office. You're supposed to have constitutional government, and that governments are replaced by a proper constitutional process. But because Magyar is obviously the good guy, and Orban and anyone associated with Orban is obviously a bad guy, then you don't have to. We don't have to waste time on constitutional niceties. He's just unpopular. He reminds everyone of Fidesz. He reminds them of Orban. So get him out. So that's it. Just unpopular. Get him out. Um, and then so after joining the president, whom all Hungarians can be proud, leaders of the governing TISA party have repeatedly said they want a president to be elected directly by the public rather than parliament. As a result, the president elected now could serve only temporarily until a new constitution is adopted. Notice how they say until a new constitution is adopted, as if it's going to happen, as if, well, a new constitution is just, it's just a matter of time. There will be a new constitution. How do you know there's going to be a new constitution? You have no idea. You have absolutely not the slightest idea that there's going to be a new constitution, with no evidence whatever that Magyar intends to promulgate a new constitution. None at all. But you just repeat it because apparently Magyar may have said something, and then everyone just repeats it. Oh, he's going to introduce a new constitution. It's just, there's going to be a new constitution. Oh yeah, and there's going to be wide national public debate. Just like there was a wide public debate about the removal of the president. But just repeat, yeah, until a new constitution. Well, it's just a matter of right. Yeah, it should be done in about a couple of weeks. And then here's the Guardian's similar theme. Hungary's chess queen declines Magyar's offer of role as president, and so the Guardian says, as news emerged that Súlyog had signed the legislation bringing an end to his time in office, Magyar proposed nominating Polgár as his replacement. The idea was first floated in an open letter signed by 16 prominent Hungarians, including Erno Rubik, the inventor of the Rubik's Cube. Now, this is a classic lie. Absolute lie. This whole thing, because the sequence of events is not the sequence that they describe. They're suggesting that the idea for appointing Polgár, this is, as I said, how the media going to respond? Oh, it wasn't our boy, Magyar, whom we love. These are great. No. It wasn't him who was just trying to ram this through on an unwilling country. No. That's not what happened. No, there were these. It was these civic leaders, these great guys like Erno Rubik. It's like, like what do most people know about Hungary? Well, they know about Rubik's Cube, and they might know about Polgár. Oh, and of course they might know, at least older Guardian readers might remember Ferenc Puskás. Oh yeah, the great Hungarian football team of the early 1950s. That's about it. Most people just don't know anything about Hungary. So if you're going to write about Hungary in the Western media, then you have to bring up the one or two things that people know about Hungary. And that one or two things includes the Rubik Cube. But in any case, this is a lie, because the idea of imposing Polgár on Hungary was entirely the idea of Peter Magyar. It was Magyar's ideas from start to finish. The 16 civic leaders was Magyar. Magyar was the one who kind of created this group of the 16 leaders, as if they're acting independently, and they put forward this proposal. Because if you recall, Magyar attended the July the 4th festivities at the U.S. Embassy, and he played chess against Polgár. And then he made a cutesy little, Facebook post saying, "Oh, she really beat me in about 5 minutes or whatever." That was when the plan was hatched. So it was a long time ago. This plan was hatched that Polgár would be the president, and Polgár was ready to take. Last week, Polgár was ready to do the job. it was the angry response that caught her by surprise. And I think she then felt, hey, there's going to be her reputation will be solid. And the issue of which we don't know, but it may well be on the back burner, was likely to come up, was, is she or is she not a citizen of Israel? Now, Hungary is, of course, quite philo-Semitic, um, but that's still a bridge too far if you're going to have a president who's also the citizen of another country. I mean, you just can't do that. I mean, you're the president, you're the one who's commanding of the armed forces, and you're the citizen of another country. It could not be. So that was always going to the a problem that would arise. So how does the media spin this? Well, the media spin it by making the issue about these civic leaders. Oh, they were the ones. Oh, it was they. It wasn't Magyar. No, no, no. It wasn't the government that was trying to inflict this person onto the Hungarians. No, no, it was the civic leaders. Imagine a civic leader. No, no, that's it. It's the civic. I didn't have anything. It was them. It was the civic leaders. It was Rubik. It was this guy you like, Rubik. Rubik was the one. He came up with the idea. I had nothing to do with it. Anyway, so this is Rubik's Cube. Since being swept into power on the promise of a regime change, Magyar and his party have moved swiftly to dismantle the bastions of Orban's 16 years in power, from suspending news broadcasts. Oh, fantastic. Isn't that great? The Guardian, this is great. Look at the Guardian rejoicing that we don't have news broadcasts. We don't have a news channel here anymore. There is no television news anymore in Hungary. But the Guardian rejoices. There is no television news. You turn to the Hungarian news channel and you see boring old films. Boring old Hungarian films. To dismantle the bastions of Orban's 16 years in power, from suspending news broadcasts by public media outlet with ties to the former prime minister. What does that mean, ties to the former? It's like the BBC has ties to the government. Yeah, because it's basically run by the government. The same is in most countries. Most countries, they have the news outlets that are run by the government. Public media outlet with ties to the former prime minister, to abolishing the Sovereignty Protection Office, which had allowed intelligence services to access information on individual and organization without judicial oversight. Now, this is typical garbage, absolute garbage that you get from The Guardian. The Sovereignty Protection Office, the whole point of the Sovereignty Protection Office was to keep an eye out for organizations that were basically funded and run from abroad. Most of Eastern Europe, most of the former republics of the Soviet Union, they are absolutely littered, inundated, overrun by NGOs. These NGOs are all funded from abroad. They're funded by the EU, they're funded by the United States, they're funded by these nebulous entities that kind of partly with government, partly non-government, such as the various Soros organizations. But there's all kinds of these philanthropies run by these billionaires, Bill Gates, Reid Hoffman. I mean, the place is littered with these NGOs. And so if you want to maintain somehow national sovereignty, you've got to keep control of the NGOs. Otherwise, you're just going to be overrun by them. And your whole country is going to be run by powers from abroad. These are you're going to be run by Brussels, you're going to be run by Berlin, you're going to be run by Washington. You're not going to be in control of yourself. And this is particularly the case with small countries such as Hungary. Hungary is a very small country, quite a poor country, in comparison with the Western powerhouses like Germany. And so that was the reason for the Sovereignty Protection Office. You're going to make sure that, that all these groups promoting journalism, promoting civic responsibility, promoting civic law, and a whole lot of them are actually genuinely Hungarian institutions. And it's full time work. You really do need a government office to make sure that you're not being run by external powers. Now, the same Guardian, the same media, Guardian and all the rest, who write about, the sovereignty protected by the intelligence agency, these same people are, of course, writing articles about how Russia is infiltrating every aspect of European society. Everywhere you turn, Russia's malevolent tentacles are to be found. So it's okay when we extend our tentacles in just about every country. We run every country through our NGOs, not to mention direct payments to these supplicant governments, such as the governments of Moldova, Romania, and so on. But but heaven forbid that Russia should be exerting its influence on other countries. So how horrific, how terrifying, how absolutely appalling that Hungary should have a sovereignty protection office, while at the same time we need to be very, very vigilant about Russia and on all the nefarious influence that Russia exerts. Anyway, so this is the standard take from the Guardian. And then we have the Times of Israel. Oh, look at that. First thing it says, first thing in the headline: Jewish chess legend Judith Polgar declines offer to become Hungary's president. Jewish chess legend Judith Polgar on Monday turned down Hungarian Prime Minister Peter Magyar's offer to join his push to break with the Viktor Orban era as the country's president. The pro-European conservative. Sorry, I have to stop there again. Now, this is again typical of the imbecility that you get in the media. I mean, imbecility in media, that's almost a redundancy. He's always described as a conservative. He's given no indication that he's a conservative. He's never described himself as a conservative. No one around him has ever described him as a conservative. But but if you describe him as a conservative, you kind of give more credibility to him. Well, of course, he's a conservative. So he criticizes Fidesz from a conservative perspective. There's nothing conservative about him. He hasn't done anything conservative. He's never been a conservative. He was an apparatchik. He moved his way up within the Fidesz apparat, as a lot of opportunist Hungarians did, just as a lot of Hungarians moved their way through the communist apparat. Hungarians are not given to too many principles, too many ideological dictums. They more or less, they're looking out for number one. And if this is how you make your career, then this is how you make your career. They made their career under communism. They didn't particularly like communism, but this was your career path. So in the same way, you have a career path through Fidesz. And Polgar, not Polgar, Magyar made his he embarked on this career path through making his contacts in Fidesz, and of course he made the prize. He got the prize in Fidesz, he married the boss's daughter, so to speak, and that was the up and coming star of Fidesz. He married her, which was Judith Varga, who was the justice minister and was on track to be the leader of Fidesz in the European Parliament. So she was going to basically be the face of Fidesz in Europe. So she was on track, but of course then disaster struck with a whole so-called pedophile scandal. We don't want to get into that now. But he married the boss's daughter, and he moved up in the he continued moving up within the apparat. But I think as a conservative, I mean, it's so stupid. It's almost unbelievable. I mean, it's like saying von der Leyen is a conservative. Well, why not? Why not say conservative? Yeah, well, she's in the CDU. She moved her way within the CDU. Well, of course, she moved her way within the CDU. Her rich dad, had been a powerful figure within the CDU. He was a contender to be the CDU's nominee to challenge Helmut Schmidt in the federal elections in 1976. There was he was eventually the nominee of the CDU-CSU was Helmut Kohl, but nonetheless, her dad was sufficiently important within the CDU to be one of the contenders to represent the CDU-CSU in the federal election. And that was her father, and of course she moved her way within the CDU apparat. That's what happens. And but the idea of describing von der Leyen as a conservative is idiotic. Fortunately, I don't think even that would be a little bit too much for the media. I haven't seen that described, that Ursula von der Leyen is some kind of a conservative. But maybe somebody can find that such a reference. But because so few people know about Hungary, other than Viktor Orban is this terrible person we're supposed to hate, which is about all anyone now knows about Hungary. Well, Orban is someone we're supposed to hate. Beyond that, say, oh well, yeah, but Orban has now been replaced by a conservative. Oh, that's great. Oh, fantastic. He's a conservative. So that means it's going to be somebody who genuinely believes in conservatism, as opposed to Orban, who believes in illiberal democracy, whatever the hell that means. Anyway, so but what was he's a conservative. Best of all is when they say he's a conservative nationalist. Yeah, this is a person who's done nothing to promote any Hungarian national interests whatsoever. He's a complete pathetic supplicant to Brussels, but he's a nationalist guy, conservative nationalist, Peter Magyar. But anyway, here we go to the pro-European conservative, pro-European, had nominated Polgar, widely considered the greatest woman to have taken to the checkerboard as a figure from outside politics to help carry out his promise of regime change from Orban's hard line, whatever the hell that means, hard line 16-year tenure. After rejecting unpopular President Thomas Shulyok by constitutional amendment last week, Magyar backed Polgar late on Sunday as president, of whom all Hungarians can be proud. Now that was the story with Polgar, and I'm kind of amused by the Times of Israel. I mean, there's always something hilarious about Israelis who are so opportunistic. I mean, and that they're actually kind of stupid in many ways. They're sort of, oh yeah, we're gonna hitch our star to the wagon of Magyar. Fantastic. Now you got a bit of a problem there. Orban had actually been very pro-Israeli. Yeah, I mean many people, I think among Gagglers, but others have said, well, if there's one thing I hate about Orban, I like Orban's view of the war in Ukraine. I love the way he defies Brussels. But if there's one thing I hate about Orban, That's his pro-Israeli stance. I mean, I got a lot of that, and I'd have to agree. I don't particularly like that either. But he has been very, very pro-Israeli, and he notoriously supported Netanyahu against George Soros, because when Netanyahu was involved in the whole to do against Human Rights Watch, because of the reports that Human Rights Watch was publishing about Israel, and he particularly Netanyahu focused on George Soros, because Soros is, of course, a big bankroller of Human Rights Watch. But Orban vociferously took the side of Netanyahu against the Hungarian George Soros. And of course, Netanyahu visited Hungary. Remember, he visited Hungary after the International Criminal Court had issued an arrest warrant. So Hungary had been a member of the ICC, and Orban and his foreign minister Peter Szijjártó said, "Well, we're not going to be arresting Netanyahu when he comes. We don't care about what the ICC says. In fact, we're going to leave the ICC." And in fact, to coincide with Netanyahu's visit, Hungary said, "We're going to leave the ICC," and Orban began the proceedings to separate Hungary from the ICC. It would be the one NATO EU country that would no longer be a member of the ICC. So he began to institute the procedure. Now, Orban loses the election. The beloved Peter Magyar comes to power, and Magyar, who's desperate to be in with Brussels, announces, "You know what? We're revoking Orban's decree saying that Hungary will leave the ICC. No. In fact, we're staying. We're gonna remain a part of the ICC. So consider that decision by Orban null and void. Hungary is back in good standing with the ICC." So the Israelis who are supporting Peter Magyar, they don't seem to have thought this through, that you're now supporting somebody who has reneged on the pledge to leave the ICC. Hungary is now back with the ICC. So if Netanyahu were to make another visit to Hungary, then he could be facing arrest. So I'm not sure these Israelis have actually thought this through. They're so desperate to keep in with what's fashionable opinion that they haven't quite grasped all of the nuances here. But anyway, that was the Times of Israel. Now, I mentioned yesterday that Magyar has given every indication that they're planning on a prosecution of Peter Szijjártó, the previous Hungarian foreign minister. But it's now looking as if Peter Magyar is planning on a prosecution of Fidesz. And it seems like today there was a raid on Fidesz's office, and they the police seized Fidesz's server. So we know this from an announcement by Fidesz that we were subjected to a raid. And here, prosecutors appeared at the Fidesz server secure center without prior notice, with the intention of seizing the party's entire communication system and database. This has never happened in Hungary since the end of communism in 1990. The Tisza party's plan to eliminate Fidesz, and with it the opposition with political tools, has failed. Therefore, the Tisza party is now attempting to legally nullify Fidesz. Fidesz neither allows nor retreats from political or legal threats, and stands up against the Tisa party's violent arbitrariness. And then Magyar sent out this cheeky posting on Facebook. It says, according to Fidesz's own information today, investigators conducted a house search and seizure in connection with the servers of Viktor Orban's party. We are waiting for the prosecutor's briefing. So I'm really looking forward to the briefing as to what's on the servers. Oh, you see, he's being cutesy. And then we have here's a story about this. And again, the media so thinking to themselves, "Hey, these are cool guys. These are the cool cats." Obviously, when if there needed to be a raid on Fidesz, then obviously there had to be a raid on Fidesz. I mean, yeah, hey, that's the way you do it. That's what you have to do. This. Orban's Fidesz says Hungary prosecutors raid party service. And then here we have the Fidesz party of Hungary's nationalist ex-leader Viktor Orban, which was swept from power in elections in April, said on Tuesday that prosecutors had launched a raid on its data servers. And then, since ending Orban's hardline 16-year-long rule, Prime Minister Peter Magyar's new pro-European conservative government, that's a pro-European, this I just keep repeating the same, conservative, has rushed to loosen his lingering grip. Lingering, no, so notice they say this is lingering grip. How do they know this? How do they know that he has a lingering grip? Well, they don't. That's what they've been told to say. Oh, yeah, it's a lingering grip. Oh, he's the grip, and it's lingering. So, yeah, we have to seize the servers because his grip is lingering. We have to remove from office the legally appointed president because Orban's grip is lingering. I mean, you could pretty much do anything under these circumstances. You can imprison anyone and just say, well, we have to, I mean, it's the lingering grip. You have to loosen the lingering grip. And then here we have Magyar's Tisa party swept the election. How many times are you going to say swept the elections? Okay. On the promise of regime change and a clean break with the Orban era. And then his government has moved swiftly to undo the former leader's grip on the Hungarian state, including passing a swathe of anti-corruption measures and changing the constitution to effectively bar Orban from running again. Orban's Fidesz has consistently decried Magyar's moves as autocratic, a charge often leveled against the former nationalist leader during his tenure. Well, okay. Was that accurate? I mean, yeah, that was leveled against him. Is there any comparison between what Orban did during his 16 years in power to what these people are doing in the first few months of power? And if there is a comparison, then please tell us. Don't just simply say, oh, yeah, well, Orban did that and much worse. Like what? What did he do that was much worse? Did he ever remove a president? Did he remove a president of a constitutional court? Did he ban politicians from running in the next election, as Magyar has done? He said he's just simply banning it and using the legislation retroactively so that anyone who has served 12 years in parliament can no longer run, which of course affects the opposition, but doesn't affect his government because they're all new people. But the Fidesz people, they've been around for a while, so it affects them. So all of it would, of course, not pass any kind of constitutional muster in any serious country with any serious court of law, because any serious constitutional court would say you can't do things retroactively. You can adopt a measure by saying, okay, henceforth, term limits will be 12 years. Starting from now. so that it applies to everyone equally. But this doesn't apply to everyone equally. It only applies to Fidesz. It doesn't apply to TISA. So it's obviously unfair, and any constitutional court will say this is unfair. That's why you don't apply things retroactively. You don't make ex post facto law. It's a very basic, the most basic unit of legal philosophy. You can't make ex post facto law. But with the media, oh, fantastic! They're trying to loosen Orban's grip on power. That's so great. Um, and anyway, that's so that. And then I hear the same nonsense from Reuters. Um, and then here, it's more from Reuters. And then Orban again late this afternoon. He had been watching the World Cup over the weekend. So he's back now in Hungary. He issued this statement. It's a statement of confession of independence after decades of dictatorship imposed by the German and Soviet occupation. In 1990, the Hungarian people won their freedom and established a democratic rule of law. In 2011, the sixth freely elected parliament adopted the Constitution of Hungary, thus ending the interim period of regime change, establishing the guarantees of national sovereignty, and creating the foundations of a democratic rule of law. From today, our mission is to restore the democratic rule of law. We will help the victims of the regime change. We will take action against all perpetrators of the regime change, both inside and outside the parliament. From today, our commitment is to restore the democratic rule of law. We will help the victims of the regime change. We will record the violations committed by the Fidesz government. After the restoration of the democratic rule of law, we will give the victims and the harmed their rightful compensation. In order to restore a secure, peaceful civic life, we support everyone who, in the face of regime change, raises their voice for freedom, acts in solidarity with others, and stands up for the restoration of the democratic rule of law. No one can take away the right of Hungarians to live freely, safely, and peacefully, and to prosper. The more and more bravely we raise our voices, the sooner this rampage will end, and we can return to the peaceful, safe, and free Hungarian life that was interrupted by the rule of the TISA party. So be it. All right. Now, that's a kind of statement of intent, but it's clear that that Hungary really badly needs some kind of a an opposition movement that can challenge this government. Otherwise, it's all just going to be swept away. It's not clear at the moment whether this statement by Orban and a revamped, reconstituted Fidesz will be that opposition. They seem to be completely demoralized. I can't see anyone coming up with any sort of an agenda, any sort of program, and I don't see anyone really putting up any kind of a fight. There doesn't seem to be any real resistance to Magyar, except maybe here at the Gaggle. I mean, I think the strongest criticism of the Magyar regime is to be found here at the Gaggle, because I don't see it anywhere else here in Hungary. So we'll keep an eye out on this. I can't say that I'm terribly optimistic. I dare say at some point things will change, but that's not going to happen tomorrow. So we may have to put up with this for quite some time. Anyway, let's now move to the Gaggle locals page. This is where the Gagglers meet, and Gagglers raise all their interesting and thoughtful comments, and raise very interesting questions. And as always, and I say this, and every live stream. If you want to ask me questions, if you want to address anything I say, anything you disagree with, any comments at all, please join our locals community. It's a lot of fun, a lot of extremely smart people, who are always have interesting things to say, always have post interesting stuff. I'm always learning from other gagglers, so this is the place to be. It's very simple to join. The gaggle.locals.com, very, very straightforward. And then, I can address your questions. Anyway, so first question, it comes from Stone River. Good to see you, Stone River. Thank you for your generosity. And Stone River says, George, is anyone in Europe noticing what's going on in Hungary? Could this eventually backfire on the Eurocrats? So that's a really good question. I haven't noticed so far anyone in Europe paying too much attention to this. Now, you're right that that could change, and there have been some statements from like Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International, who naturally say, well, things are really terrible under Orban, but this isn't the answer. This Magyar seems to be replicating the strategy of Viktor Orban, and so yeah, it's perfectly fine. Yes, reasonable to take out Tamás Súlyog, but it should have been done in a more thoughtful, more judicious, more constitutionally appropriate manner. So that's the best that you can say, even though there was no justification for removing him. I mean, I don't care very much about Tamás Súlyog. I mean, he's just a president. But it is an important issue as to whether you're removing a president in accordance with constitutional norms. You're not just removing him because you don't like him. I mean, that's not how any democracy is supposed to function. So I'm not convinced by any of these statements by Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International, but nonetheless, however insipid and namby-pamby and feeble these critiques may sound, they are nonetheless critiques. I mean, they are nonetheless saying, well, this isn't quite the right way to go about things. So that it may be a sign that that others are going to raise their voice against Peter Magyar. I mean, that's not to say that anybody in Europe will want Orban back, and that's part of the problem. That there's so much animus towards Viktor Orban that they are going to cut Magyar a lot of slack. So whatever critiques they will offer will be very, very gentle, little more than just, not even taps on the wrist, little flicks on the wrist. But I do think that he doesn't carry himself in a very prime ministerial way. I mean, whatever else you can say about Viktor Orban, I mean, he did have a certain gravitas. You may not like him, but he came across as a leader, as a prime minister. Magyar doesn't come across like that. He comes across as a kind of a buffoonish, an overgrown schoolboy, in love with himself, in love with the power that he's suddenly acquired. He doesn't inspire confidence, in other words. So there may be some turn against him. But ultimately, you can't beat anyone unless you have an alternative in mind. You have to beat someone with someone. And at the moment, the opposition in Hungary seems in such disarray. No one has emerged as somehow the leader in waiting, somebody who's going to be offering powerful critiques day in, day out against the Magyar regime. That hasn't happened. Maybe it'll be up to Orban, and Orban, a rejuvenated Orban, can do it. But at the moment, it's not looking particularly good. I didn't think much of that statement that I just read out. To be honest, I thought it's generic, kind of boring, and much of it was so vague. I didn't even know what the hell he was talking about. So, um, but again, maybe it'll change. But fundamentally, you know, at the moment there is no challenger on the scene. However, as we discussed in the case of the Polgar nomination, he's making mistakes. That's not the first mistake he's made, but this was quite a serious mistake. This was a serious faux pas. Um, Polgar, who intended to take that position, backed away. She basically she abandoned him. So we'll see. But at the moment, I think things are not looking good. There's a dictatorship is being instituted, and there doesn't seem to be any real resistance coming from Hungarians. Anyway, thank you so much, Stone River. Cynthia, always very good to see Cynthia, our film scholar, our film expert, film encyclopedist, whose knowledge of cinema history and cinema production is second to none, and we're always very fortunate to have her here at the Gaggle, one of our leading Gagglers here at the Gaggle to fill us in on the films that we screen every week, and so we always get to enjoy the benefits of Cynthia's wide cinematic learning. The film this week is an Italian film from the 1970s. If it was made in 1970, Investigation of a Citizen Above Suspicion. An interesting film, I think you'll see. Politically, as many Italian films of that time were prone to be, it's kind of crude. It's not politically the most sophisticated. Nonetheless, it's very interesting to watch. Interesting for the style of the film, and interesting for the kind of aesthetic that Italian filmmakers were practicing at that time. Italian cinema had gone through different phases: the neo-realism phase, and then of course there was the cinema of alienation of Antonioni, and now we had these political films. A little crude, but nonetheless interesting, such as Investigation of a Citizen Above Suspicion. But anyway, I mean, that's just my introduction. You can learn a lot more about this film, rather interesting film, by watching it. It's there. It's available to all Gagglers. It's on the locals board. And as I always say, as you watch the film, read Cynthia's really interesting and insightful comments and observations and explanations for all the tricks of the filmmakers, the music and the editing and all that, which is all of which is very interesting, particularly in this film. So, watch the film, read Cynthia's commentary. Anyway, Cynthia here says, bombing civilians does not force surrender. Agreed. Robert Pape showed air power is no magic weapon. Bomb. Yeah, as Scott Horton notes, the 1991 Gulf War was a lone exception because Saddam's tanks were trapped in the open desert. Horton notes Kosovo in 1999 proved it an anomaly. Clinton lost because air power utterly failed. Milosevic was ready to sign a peace deal until NATO added a secret Appendix B demanding the right to occupy all of Yugoslavia. Milosevic refused, triggering the bombing campaign. And then Cynthia goes on. That 78-day air campaign failed to break Serbia, resulting in a strategic defeat for Clinton. Unlike the open desert of 1991, the Serbs hid their actual soldiers and tanks in caves, forests, and barns. They left the life-sized cardboard tanks in open fields, tricking the enemy into wasting missiles and even downing a stealth fighter with old World War II radar. Since air power failed and no ground invasion was planned, Clinton conceded, dropping Appendix B, to accept the exact terms Milosevic offered pre-war. Um, I wouldn't quite go along with that. I mean, I agree with some of what you said there. The the thing about the 78-day air campaign, yes, it didn't force Serbian surrender. But then there was the meeting in Belgrade when Chernomyrdin, he was then Russian prime minister, and he was accompanied by Marty Ahtisaari. And Marty Ahtisaari said that we're just going to basically bomb. We're going to be bomb, 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 and we're going to level Belgrade. We're going to just destroy Belgrade. We're going to, basically, because we've done this, we've tried to limit the bombing. That hasn't worked. So now we're going to hit the civilian targets. Now, whether they would have done that, whether they wouldn't have, we don't know. I think they would have done. I think they would have actually started hitting Belgrade seriously, hitting civilian targets seriously. Milosevic uh, decided that he would. He would agree to the terms that were on offer. Now, I agree that the terms were not quite what was on offer at Rambouillet. Now, Rambouillet, there were basically two parts to the Rambouillet agreement. There was the political agreement, which were basically outrageous. I mean, it was the terms that were offered was outrageous, whereby Kosovo was effectively independent of Serbia, but Serbia was not independent of Kosovo. So in other words, Kosovo got to have a say in what went on in Serbia, but Serbia had no say in what went on in Kosovo. So all investment in Kosovo was exclusively for use in Kosovo. Investment in Serbia, on the other hand, Kosovo got a cut of any investment that was made in Serbia. So Kosovo would have representation in Serbia's institutions, in Yugoslavia's institution, but Serbia, Yugoslavia would have no representation in Kosovo's institution. It was a total humiliation, absolutely humiliation. Milosevic, however, said, okay, fine. We can work with that agreement, because Milosevic really wanted to avoid the bombing. He said we can work with that. Now, what's important to keep in mind in all of this is that Madeleine Albright, particularly Madeleine Albright, but also generally the Clinton administration, were very, very anxious to bomb. They wanted to bomb. They were absolutely desperate to show the relevance of NATO, and they wanted to bomb the Serbs. The only way they could do that was to present to the world that somehow they put forward this very reasonable plan, and that the KLA, the Kosovo Liberation Army, had accepted the plan, while the Serbs had rejected it. So if they could present to the world that the Serbs had rejected this very, very good plan, and the KLA had accepted the plan, then they could bomb. So when Milosevic said, "Oh, fine. Well, we don't have a problem with this political part of the plan. We can work with that." Well, then Madeleine Albright didn't know what to do, because you couldn't really bomb the Serbs if the Serbs had accepted the plan. So what they did was, on the very last day of those negotiations in Rambouillet, the very, very last day, they introduced the Appendix B that you refer to. And Appendix B was, absolutely unconditional, uncontrolled movement of NATO forces throughout Yugoslavia. And this, of course, Milosevic said no to, for obvious reasons. But that in itself would not achieve Albright's goal of bombing the Serbs because the KLA hadn't accepted the Rambouillet agreement. Because what the KLA wanted was some kind of a pledge by the United States that Kosovo would be independent. Now, Madeleine Albright in the United States was ready to give them, say, yeah, fine, we'll give you independence. I don't care, fine. We hate the Serbs anyway. Yeah, have independence. The problem was that the other states in NATO couldn't accept that. They couldn't really accept unilateral secession. I mean, that's just, it's anathema to many NATO member states. Still is. That's why a number of NATO states still refuse to accept Kosovo independence. So they tried to. So that first round of negotiations at Rambouillet ended inconclusively because effectively the Serbs had said no, and the KLA had said no. So then they started applying some serious pressure on the KLA to get them to say yes. They told them, if you say yes, and the Serbs continue to say no, and they will say no because of Appendix B. If you say yes, we can bomb the Serbs. That's what you want, isn't it? You want to bomb the Serbs, don't you? Yeah, we want to bomb the Serbs. Fine, just say yes to this agreement. And so they said, well, yeah, but what about this pledge that we can have independence? So what they got was a letter. It was a letter from Clinton saying, yeah, well, sometime down the road we'll have a referendum on independence. Because they got this letter. And once they had that, then the KLA said, okay, fine. So it wasn't part, the Pledge of Independence wasn't part of the Rambouillet Agreement. They just got a letter from Clinton saying, yeah, some point down the road, there will be a referendum in Kosovo on independence. And that was it. That was sufficient. KLA said, okay, yes. The Serbs continued to say no, and then they got the bombing, which is what they wanted. Now, when the agreement, the agreement that Milosevic had signed on to, you're absolutely right. Appendix B was gone. Also gone was the that any forces inside Kosovo would be under NATO command. That was gone. They said no, it'll be under United Nations command. And that any forces that enter into Kosovo would be authorized by a UN Security Council resolution. So this was all Milosevic achieved those. I mean, I think it's too much to say that he somehow Clinton had failed and Milosevic has succeeded. It wasn't as bad as Rambouillet. I mean, I think one could say he had succeeded in avoiding the total disaster and humiliation of Rambouillet. So he got something that at least Serbia could live with. What happened subsequently, after they marched in, was in the first place, there was a complete rampage. The Albanians went on a complete rampage against the Serbs. And then the Russians had to step in. I mean, and if you recall, the Russians they were part of this force which was going to be authorized by the United Nations, KFOR, which is still there. KFOR. Russia was part of that force, and the Russians were the first to enter Kosovo because the Russians was suspected that the Albanians would go on an absolute rampage against the Serbs. So the Russians came in essentially to protect the Serbs. Then, when the Russians stepped in, NATO sent its forces in, and then there was that tense confrontation between the NATO forces and Russia at Pristina Airport, that where famously the British general Mike Jackson told Wesley Clark, "I'm not going to start World War III for you." But then, subsequently, I think there was massive cheating on the Rambouillet agreement. Part of the not on the Rambouillet, on the UN Security Council Resolution 1244. So, for instance, there was not supposed to be any kind of a unilateral declaration of independence. That was absolutely said. The status of Kosovo has to be negotiated among all the interested parties. No one does anything unilaterally. Well, the NATO powers did in 2008. Kosovo declared independence, and the NATO powers rushed in to recognize Kosovo. Um, and so so the way it worked was that, yes, if you looked at the agreement wasn't as for the Serbs wasn't as bad as Rambouillet was, but because NATO cheated from the start, particularly as there was no protection for the religious sites, and Serbs were supposedly were to be allowed to visit the religious site. That was, of course, ignored. Um, but because the NATO forces cheated, essentially, you'd have to say Kosovo was a failure. It was a defeat for the Serbs. Kosovo was stolen from Serbia. NATO stole Kosovo from Serbia. So uh, whatever Nick Milosevic had managed to extract from Clinton and NATO were then overturned by NATO lying and cheating. Um, but in the case of Milosevic, he was such a reasonable person. He's not. He's a lot more reasonable than the leaders in Iran. The leaders in Iran, they are tough guys. They mean business. It's going to be very hard to crack their will. And I'm not saying that Milosevic's will was broken, but he was a responsible leader, and he didn't want to be the leader who presided over the destruction of Belgrade, an ancient European city. He didn't want to see Belgrade destroyed, and so it's understandable that he was looking for ways in which he could come to an agreement that preserved Serbian dignity and honor while also avoiding the destruction of his city. Anyway, those are my thoughts for this evening. But really interesting question. Thank you, Cynthia. And then Summer Petros, good to see you. Summer Petros says, George, the name Healy strikes chord as Chancellor of the Exchequer Finance Minister in the UK when preceded the name Dennis. But what do you think of John Healey as the new Chancellor in the Andy Starmer government? Not going to fall for the Andy Starmer. He's Andy Burnham. I know I always call him Andy Starmer, but I've learned now that his real name is Andy Burnham. Yes, it is very strange that John Healey was the defense secretary to follow in the footsteps of Dennis Healey, who was, of course, defense secretary during the Harold Wilson years in the 1960s. John Healey strikes me as as thick as two planks. I remember we did a whole podcast about it was a live stream on John Healey. First, when he was blustering about how they'd seized a Russian tanker or a flag, supposedly carrying Russian oil, or on the way to carrying Russian oil, and Healey was ecstatic about this fantastic success for the British. And then, of course, Healey resigned from the Starmer government, banging his fist on the table that not enough money was being allocated to the military. He wanted lots and lots of more money because Russia is such a horrific threat, and therefore Britain's defense and security are wholly dependent on spending, 3 times as much as Britain was spending them. So he resigned, but now he's back. Now, if one looks at what Burnham has done, it's kind of very interesting. He has essentially removed the kind of Blairite, Starmerites from the government. So all the people who were associated with Blair and Starmer are gone. So, for instance, Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, she's just been sacked. She didn't even get demoted. She just got the sack. The and those who had resigned from from Starmer's government, like Healy, he's got the biggest job. It's the number two position in government. He's now Chancellor of the Exchequer. He had stormed out in a huff from Starmer's government. Now he's back with a big promotion. He's the Chancellor of the Exchequer. Um, Home Secretary, she stays in the same place as she was. Wes Streeting, and Wes Streeting was the one who really put the boot in. He's the one who really got the knife in. He basically did in Starmer. Wes Streeting, he gets a nice promotion. Um, and but Angela Rayner, who got the boot, she's back. I think she's the health secretary. And so this was a purge, and of course David Lammy, who had enjoyed big positions, also thick as two planks. He'd also enjoyed big positions under Starmer. He'd been deputy prime minister. He had been foreign secretary. A real dimwit. But nonetheless, he was in with Starmer, and he had a big, all these big positions under Starmer. He's gone. He's out. So John Healey, who had fallen out with Starmer, big promotion. Angela Rayner, fallen out with Starmer, she's back in. So big, it's very much the purge of the Starmerites. You know, I tend to think, I don't. When it comes to these things, I don't think they make too many decisions themselves. As far as I can see, Andy Burnham's, is it Andy Burnham's? Yeah, Keir Starmer, Andy Burnham. So Andy Burnham's position is we're going to spend lots and lots and lots of money that we don't have, and we're going to have lots and lots of programs, and that'll make us very popular, and then we'll win the next election. Well, a lot of politicians have come up with that idea. I mean, it's not, you don't have to be a genius to come up with this notion. Let's just spend lots of money. That'll make us very popular, and then we'll win the next election. I remember Boris Johnson had the same idea. I remember, when he said, 2019, we're going to spend a huge amount of money on the National Health Service. We're going to spend an awful lot on the police. We're going to spend a lot more on defense, and then we're going to have all the environmental stuff. Just going to, money, lots and lots of money that we're just going to spend. We don't have any of that money, and of course, when you start spending money that you don't have, you soon run into trouble. And I would imagine Burnham, who doesn't have the money, I mean, he's already talking about what he's going to remove this tax and that tax, and he's going to spend a lot of money. I don't see how he's going to make ends meet. So I would imagine he's going to start splurging for a while, and then he's going to start when he gets a warning from, as always, a warning from the bond market that hey, you can't spend money that you don't have. He's going to retreat and resort to the familiar austerity plan. Healy, I think he's very, very stupid. Unlike Dennis, who, whatever else you may have thought about him, he was a very smart guy. I mean, people who can remember Dennis Healy, so it was a long time ago. He was indeed a smart guy. John Healy isn't. But in terms of his Chancellor of the Exchequer, my prediction is they're going to talk the big game about how much they're going to spend on all these fantastic things. The NHS, they always promise, and that's the promise. We're going to spend all this money. we're going to subsidize people's electricity bills, and we're going to spend a lot more on defense, because that's, of course, his John Healy's little baby. But they're going to have to realize, where's the money going to come from? They don't have money for all of this. So, anyway, thank you so much, Summer Petrus. I appreciate your generosity. Aubergine, thank you very much, Aubergine. And Aubergine says, George, what do you think? What do you make of Andy Burnham appointing Ed Miliband as Foreign Secretary? In particular, do you expect any meaningful change in the UK's policy on Ukraine? It's a very good question, Aubergine. It's very, very Ed Miliband was a kind of fairly nondescript figure. The only thing I always found interesting about Ed Miliband, of course, his brother David Miliband, was their father. Their father was a sort of Ralph Miliband. I mean, he was a Jewish refugee, kind of found a home in the United Kingdom. I think it was sometime in the late 1930s. And then, of course, he became a kind of a notorious professor at the London School of Economics. And that's when he became quite famous, particularly during the 1968, during the massive protests of students, and particularly at the London School of Economics. And that's when London School of Economics acquired this reputation of being this hotbed of leftism. It was nothing of the sort. I mean, the LSE was one of the most right-wing places you could imagine in the UK. But because of Ralph Miliband, and he was kind of the professor who supposedly had this malevolent influence on the young, that there was so many protests at his students were the ones who led the protests in 68. So that was that. Now, that goes back a ways in the Ralph Miliband. But Ed Miliband, I don't dislike him, because he was he was in 2013. If you recall, the British were planning to join the bombing of Syria. It was everything was all set, because Syria was accused of using chemical weapons and so on, and everything was ready to go. And then Ed Miliband demanded a vote in the House of Commons, and the he was was the leader of the Labour Party, but he demanded a vote in the House of Commons, and the vote, amazingly enough, when you actually put it to the vote, the vote went against bombing Syria. And of course, from then on, British prime ministers realized, you don't do that. You do not allow anyone to vote. Don't allow a vote. Because if you allow a vote, you never know how people are going to do it. Don't let them vote. So, but there was a vote, and the vote went against joining Obama's plan to bomb Syria. And then, of course, once Obama no longer had the support of the British always support the Americans whenever there's any plan to bomb anyone. So once you no longer had the British, Obama started to look for ways to exit and not to bomb Syria. And then, of course, the Russians stepped in and worked out some kind of a disarmament agreement that Syria would get rid of its chemical weapons, and the Americans would sign off on this, so America wouldn't bomb Syria. But nonetheless, it was Ed Miliband who ensured that that there was no bombing of Syria in 2013. So, it occurred to me that maybe he might not be so bad. He hasn't been particularly vociferous on Russia, and he did have some family that lived in Russia, so some Russian, his various Jewish family members who continue to live in Russia. And so that I mean, if you looked at on Twitter, they were saying, "Hey, you know, Ed Miliband does have family connections to Russia." So there were family members that obviously escaped Russia, including, of course, his own with Ralph and so on. But he does have family that lives in Russia, and given that he's been relatively quiet about Ukraine, maybe, just maybe, he's going to be better than Boris Johnson and Two-Tier Kier and the rest. And I did think maybe, I tend to be a very optimistic sort of person. I'm often very cheerful and upbeat. And I thought, well, who knows? Maybe he's a sort of a sensible voice. And because today, Boris Johnson let fly against Miliband. There's all Miliband. Miliband is responsible for Russia's invasion of Ukraine. How do you figure that? Well, it was Miliband. It was Miliband who prevented the use of force against Syria in 2013. It was Miliband. It was Miliband who prevented that. If only he hadn't pushed Labour to vote against the use of force, Bashar al-Assad would have been bombed, and then Putin would not have been encouraged to launch his attack on Ukraine in 2014. I mean, that's Boris Johnson's psychopathic interpretation of history. But nonetheless, I thought, well, if Boris Johnson really hates Ed Miliband so much, maybe there's something to be said for him. Maybe he's not, maybe he's not so bad. But lo and behold, what is, Miliband sends out a tweet later on in the day, says, I had a really good conversation today with the Ukrainian foreign minister. What is a really good conversation? Really, really good conversation. And British policy is as steadfast and supportive of Ukraine and everything Ukraine is fighting for as ever. So he got that in. He's the very first person that he spoke to. He said, this is my very first person I spoke to, is the Ukrainian foreign minister. So to answer your question, Aubergine, no, I don't expect any change. There was a kind of a brief flutter of usual meaningless political infighting. So because Boris Johnson attacks Ed Miliband, you think, well, hey, maybe there's something to be said for Miliband. No, that was dissipated in no time at all when Miliband said, first person I talked to as foreign secretary was the foreign minister of Ukraine. That's my priority. No, the first person was not the US Secretary of State. No, the first person was not France's foreign minister. No, the first person I spoke to was Ukraine's foreign minister. That's our foreign policy priority. So no change. Anyway, thank you so much, Aubergine. And then Robert, always very good to see you, Robert. I saw your man Chris Christie. I know it was a repulsive sight, but I saw he was taking part in some kind of a discussion. I only caught a little bit of it on Twitter. He was saying that the most repulsive person he had ever come across in his entire life was it was Kushner, Charles Kushner. This is Jared Kushner's father. He says he was the most repulsive person, but he of course prosecuted Kushner and sent him to prison. He was then the U.S. attorney for New Jersey, so he prosecuted him. But I thought it was strange that he is the most repulsive person that he come across. He's still very, very bitter. I think it's amazing thing that Chris Christie is still incredibly bitter that after 2016, that's now 10 years, that he didn't get a job in the first Trump administration, presumably then later on, and of course he blames the Kushners for his failure to get a job, and so he's still harping on about Charles Kushner. So anyway, I hadn't seen Chris Christie in a while, so that was wow. He's still bitter about Trump and the Kushners. Anyway, Robert says, thank you, George, for your concise explanation to Peter of possession defense and why it threatens the future of the game. Intrigued, I asked Chat whether a shot clock might fix it. No, that would ruin the game. Chat stubbornly insisted. In that case, market discipline may decide that it persist with possession defense and achieve a Pyrrhic victory where you win the cup but lose the fans. I think that's superbly put, Robert. Yeah, that's exactly my feeling that Spain, that's why I think Spain are the worst World Cup champions in my lifetime. I mean, you obviously had some very good champions, you've had some not so good champions, but Spain are just the worst champions. I think they are the worst thing that's ever happened to football. I think they absolutely drain football of all its energy, of all its fun, of all its vitality and its excitement. They play it in a particular way. Yeah, you can play it in this way. You can play this possession. Just keep the ball. Keep the ball. You're not really moving forward. You're just keeping the ball. And then you simply frustrate your opponents, and then they lash out, they get angry, as Argentina did, and then you win. You win by 1-0 and so on. I mean, so now I did get a lot of, and of course you're right. It's the end of football because people are they're not gonna tune into this. I mean, who wants to watch people just meaninglessly kick the ball among themselves? Now, I got a lot of pushback on what I said because people say, "Well, you don't really understand football. Spain was playing beautifully, and this was dazzling. It was amazing." I don't know what the hell they were watching, or why I thought this was the complete antithesis of what football is supposed to be, and the evidence for that. Because, oh, Spain dominated the game. Spain completely outplayed Argentina. Spain was infinitely better than Argentina. This is what I keep hearing. Okay, well, if that's the case, why was it 0-0 at halftime? If you outplay your opponent completely, then it's usually you've won the match 2-0, 3-0 at full time. It was 0-0 at halftime. So though Spain had enjoyed possession 2-1. I think 67% of the possession was that of Spain. So they enjoyed 2-1 possession throughout the game, and they still essentially was 0-0 at full time. So I think it's the death of football. Yeah, when you put it, as a market force. Yeah, I do think market forces would eventually decide it, which is why I don't think this possession football has much of a future. I think ultimately, I think the attendance numbers are going to decide this thing for them. So all the investors, this is big money is now involved in football. The investors will say, "Hey, we're losing our money. People are staying away. No one wants to watch this." And then the sponsors will stay away because they just don't have they can't get the eyeballs. They can't get people to watch the matches on TV, so the sponsors are going to go away. So I think it would, if other teams try to play like Spain, it would be the death of football. So I think Spain, worst team to have ever won the World Cup. I can't think of any. As I say, I mean, there've been some not great teams that won. I mean, I thought the England team that won in 1966 wasn't a great team, but they played reasonably attacking football. They had some good players like Bobby Charlton. But this team, no one can even remember. Can you imagine who's the star? Who's the best player of the Spanish team? Who's the real, the dynamic force of this team? Like you can always say of any World Cup champion winning team. Hey, this was the player who kind of kept the whole thing moving forward. So I got a lot of flack for it during the live stream. A lot of people attacking me. You don't know what you're talking about. You don't know. But no one really explained to me what's great about this style of play. You don't score goals. You just simply wear down your opponents, and just lead everyone to frustration. Anyway, thank you, Robert. I really appreciate that. And then Stone River adds, does anyone think that Andy Burnham, looks like Peter? Um, does he look like Peter? I don't see it, to be honest. I think he has thicker hair than Peter, and he wears different kind of spectacles. So he wears these very thick, thick rimmed spectacles. But Peter's spectacles are usually quite thin. He doesn't. I've never seen him wearing any of those thick rimmed spectacles. I don't know whether Burnham's hair is natural or not, but it seems very thick and lustrous in the picture. So I don't see it. I don't know if anyone else sees it, but I don't. But anyway, thank you, Stone River, and then Robert adds, George, you mentioned the ICC warrant for Netanyahu's arrest. Mamdani has pledged to arrest him if he comes to New York for the UN General Assembly in September. Trump says Netanyahu will not be arrested. You wonder whether, if Mamdani tries to make good on his pledge, Trump will threaten to arrest Mamdani in return. Oh, there's no question. I mean, if Mamdani did try to arrest Netanyahu and, I don't know, held him in custody or whatever, then the feds would indeed move in on the police precinct wherever Netanyahu was held, and the feds would use whatever force was necessary in order to free Netanyahu, and that would mean the feds would probably start shooting at New York City cops. It would be not unlike the scene at the beginning of Doctor Strangelove. You remember when General Jack D. Ripper closes down the airbase and orders everyone at the airbase to shoot at anyone coming to break it down, in order essentially to take into custody General Ripper. And so they start shooting, and eventually, after heavy casualties, the U.S. military breaks into the airbase. So I think that something similar would happen if Mamdani tried to take Netanyahu into custody. And there would be a shootout. Mamdani would be arrested, and he probably would be prosecuted. I mean, he has no basis for making such an arrest. And if he had been told by the president, and there is the supremacy clause, and if he had been told explicitly by the president that you are not to touch Netanyahu, and he still went ahead and touched him, then those obviously would be grounds, maybe for some move to bring treason charges against Mamdani. He has no basis for making this arrest. The United States is not a party to the ICC. It's not a signatory of the Rome Statute. It doesn't recognize the ICC. It actually sanctions the ICC. So, ICC officials cannot enter the United States. So Mamdani has no basis for enforcing ICC warrants when the United States explicitly does not recognize the jurisdiction of the ICC, and in fact sanctions, penalizes ICC officials. So I don't think Mamdani is going to do it. I don't think he's that stupid to try to do it, but I think he's getting a lot of headlines to do so. But yeah, I mean there's no question. The U.S. would arrest Mamdani and probably bring treason charges against him if he had been told explicitly, and he has been, that you are not to touch Netanyahu. But going back to Orban, I actually thought that was fantastic that Orban was withdrawing Hungary from the ICC, and it's it's the so sad state that Hungary has fallen into, that that decision has been reneged by the new government, who desperately we want to be part of the club. We want to be part of the EU club. We want to be with you. Yeah, Anita Orban, the new foreign minister, says, "Oh, it's so fantastic. I'm back with all the cool kids. I'm having cocktails with the Swedish foreign minister or the Ecuador foreign minister. It's so fantastic." So this is the pathetic nature of the Hungarian government. Anyway, thank you so much, everybody, for all of your fascinating questions and comments. I really enjoyed all of your questions. Thank you above all to those who contributed very generously to the tip jar. And we will be back Thursday at the same time. We'll see whether Trump has decided to up the ante and to go for nuclear weapons. Possible. Who knows? So see you on Thursday. Remember, if you like the gaggle, please like, share, and subscribe. See you Thursday. Bye bye.